We're just waiting for our guest of honor to arrive. So please hold tight. Thank you. Our guest of honor seems to be running just slightly behind, so if y'all will bear with me for a moment, we'll see if we can track him down.
Probably, I have some views about them, and so I'm really proud of this essay. And as we go into this season where, in addition to all of our political unrest, we are also facing this unprecedented increase in corporate power as small firms get bought up by larger and larger ones and consolidate power into fewer and fewer hands. I thought that that this would be a good piece to read. Now, before I start reading, I don't know if you folks are in the chat, but can you confirm that you can hear me okay? I'm going to turn up the gain on my mic because the way that I'm oriented right now in my backyard bar. Oh, great. Yep, you hear me. Great. Excellent. Okay, so let me get the mic out of the shot there so it's not as distracting and get it better. Yes, good. Much better now, someone says. Thank you. Yes, great digs. This is the plague bar. We built a bar during the plague in our backyard in a shed, and it's rather good, if I do say so myself. Very, very happy with it. It's the only bar that's open in Burbank right now, and I hope someday to pour you a drink here. We've actually got some friends coming over for a socially distanced drink when this is done and the barbecue is going. I've got some tri-tips going on and all of that business. So I'm sorry, I couldn't arrange a document stand. So you're going to get a lot of looks at the top of my head as I read, but I'll try to make it as visually stimulating as possible here. So this column is called IP, and it's from Locus Magazine, the current issue. You've probably heard of open source software. And if you pay attention to this stuff, you may have heard of free software, and you might even know a little about the ethical debate underpinning the war of words between those two labels. I've been involved in this fight since the last century, but even I have never really understood what was going on in the background until recently. I was looking up the history of the first free software license, and I had a revelation that transformed the way that I think about it, which is significant since, to our first approximation, this is all I think about. Here's some background. The term free software had its origins with the AI researcher turned activist Richard Stallman. He started the GNU project in 1983, leading to the creation of the GNU General Public License, the GPL. It's a copyright license for programmers who want to share their work. If you release a program's underlying code under the GPL, that means that anyone else is free to run your program, study your code, improve your code, and share those improvements with other people, provided they apply the same license to their code. So the more people do it, the more code there is, the more people do it, the more code there is. The GPL, copyright license for software, arrived at an odd juncture. It arrived really at the same time as copyright for software was arriving. Prior to 1983, software was mostly viewed as a functional work, and functional works aren't eligible for copyright. But in 1983, there was a lawsuit, Apple v. Franklin, that combined with some changes in the 1980 amendments to the Copyright Act, established that software could be copyrighted. So if you chose to apply the GPL to your copyrighted code, you could lock it open and ensure not only that other people would be able to build on it, as they had been able to since the earliest days of code, but that no one could then take that work and close it off again and wrap a proprietary copyright license around it. Today, the act of licensing your software as free software, it's considered a mark of forbearance. It's a promise on the part of software authors that they will not seek legal sanctions against people who create new programs that read and write the data, or against those who fork their program and make new versions, even those that compete with their own. To make your software free is to promise that your users will have freedom. As the saying goes, code is free as in speech, even when it's not necessarily free as in beer. Now, in 1998, free software underwent a reinvention as a more business oriented group of technical people and entrepreneurs decided that the term free software was alienating the commercial sector for two reasons. First, it stressed freedom, and second, it implied that the code would be free of charge and thus not directly commercializable. So those people coined the rival and more successful term open source, stressing the instrumental benefits of allowing third parties to scrutinize your code. Scrutineers could root out defects and prevent the nefarious subversion of code to spy on or steal data from its users. There's a saying for this too: with enough eyeballs, all bugs are shallow. But let's go back to 1983 and the birth of free software. When free software was born, software copyright was brand new and it wasn't widespread, and no one was really sure which activities would be prohibited when it came to copyrighted software. Software patents, basically unheard of and very hard to secure. Terms of service, the shrink wrap licenses, and other contracts that you agree to simply by running some code or opening a box or taking some other mundane, unsuspecting step were not considered enforceable at the time. There were no laws against bypassing DRM, and the exotic kind of para copyrights, like the one that you may have heard about as Google and Oracle have gone to the Supreme Court over whether or not an API can be copyrightable. That's the interface that one program uses to talk to another. Those didn't exist at all. So in other words, when free software was born, if you wanted to clone or interoperate with or improve or modify any existing code, all you needed to do was reverse engineer that code, and you were free to go. The GPL was not permission to make something new that was compatible with something that already existed. People who knew how to make software, they already had that permission. They behaved as though that was something they were permitted to do, irrespective of the feelings of the companies or individuals whose code they were taking. The GPL then was not a request for companies and software authors to, or rather, the GPL was a request for companies and software authors to make it easier and less tedious by handing out their source code so that would-be interoperators could skip all the wasteful, time-consuming reverse engineering stuff and go straight to the good stuff, making a new thing that improves on or even competes and replaces whatever was already made, whatever was already out there in the market. The GPL was icing on the cake. Applying the GPL to your code didn't signal that you would forswear legal vengeance upon those who wanted to make something compatible with your thing. You had no right to that vengeance. Applying the GPL to your code signaled that you wanted to collaborate with interoperators rather than impotently shaking your fist at them from the sidelines as they went right ahead and interoperated with your code against your wishes, which they had the legal right to do. Some 40 years later, the world is a very different place. Between software copyrights, anti-circumvention rules, software patents, enforceable terms of service, trade secrecy, non-compete agreements, and the pending Google-Oracle dispute over API copyrights, any attempt to interoperate with an existing product or service without explicit permission from its corporate master is a legal suicide mission, an invitation to almost unlimited criminal and civil litigation. That is to say, if you dare to modify, improve, or replace an existing dominant software-based product or service, you risk bankruptcy and even a prison sentence. 40 years ago, we had cake, and we asked for icing on top of it. Today, all we have left is that icing, and we've all but forgotten that the cake was ever there. If code isn't licensed as free, you best leave it alone. All right, so let's talk about what I mean when I say interoperability. That's obviously a very nerdy and technical and obscure term, closely related to the slightly more familiar compatibility, but the two aren't quite equivalent. In a technical sense, interoperability describes two or more products or services that can somehow work together with one another. From opening your Word document in Google Docs or using third-party ink cartridges in your printer, or just replacing your watch band or changing the stereo that came with your car, interoperability is a broad, universal, essential characteristic that all technology is born with. Interoperability is beyond that. It's the default state of the world. I'm cooking on my barbecue tonight. I get to put anyone's charcoal in my barbecue. Back when I had a gas car, I just replaced it with an electric car. Anyone's gas would go in the tank. Any manufacturer can make a light bulb that goes into your light socket, and any shoes can be worn with any socks. Now, some of this is down to standardization. Standardization is when manufacturers, academics, regulators, and other interested parties gather in these standards development organizations. To make this process simpler, describing the canonical direction and spacing of a light bulb thread, or the syntax of an HTTP request, or just the fittings that go underneath your toilet that allow you to take any toilet and just plunk it right down on the floor so the pipes line up. This certainly makes interoperability smoother. Think of the standards for paper, the stuff I'm reading off of now. There are standards like the grams per square meter, or GSM, or the size. This is letter paper. There's also legal and tabloid, or in Europe, you can get A1, A2, A3, and A4. And that makes it possible for you to reliably buy paper that works with your printer and doesn't require any additional trimming or other modifications. Now, failure to standardize can make life very, very hard. Early Australian rail barons laid their track in several different gauges, leading to the marvelously named multi-gauge muddle of a rail system where some cars and engines cannot run on some of the tracks. These barriers to interoperability, they're not insurmountable. If the paper doesn't fit in the envelope, you can fold it. If it doesn't fit in your printer, you can trim it. If the rail gauge doesn't match the rolling stock, you can modify their undercarriages to allow for multi-gauge operation. That's very difficult. Hundreds of people have tried it. No one's ever managed to implement it, but if they kept trying, they probably would. I mean, if we can put a man on the moon, we can probably figure out how to retract one set of wheels and drop down another one. Or you can just tear up some of the track and lay new ones. That's in fact what Australia decided to do as a cheaper alternative to the revamping all of the rolling stock. Interoperability, its main virtue is that it lowers switching costs. That's the cost of leaving whatever you're using now in favor of something you think will suit you better. My grandparents emigrated from the Soviet Union to Canada on a displaced person ship, and they incurred a very high switching cost when they did. Because of the political arrangements in the former Soviet Union, for more than a decade after they left, they had no contact with their family in Leningrad, except through unreliable and slow word of mouth contact through the rare person who could secure a visa to travel there. Now, contrast that to my own experience. In 2015, I moved from the United Kingdom to Los Angeles. Now, we are in routine contact with my in-laws in London and Wales, and also with my family in Toronto. This laptop I'm talking to you from, it made the trip with me, as did all of my books, and many of our personal effects. Now, we left behind most of our appliances in Europe because they run on different voltage, but there were a few things that I really liked. Like my wife once bought me a theremin kind of as a gag gift, and I dote on it. And we just moved it with us, and we changed the plugs on some of those things, and for others, we just bought adapters. Companies love high switching costs. If you're a would-be monopolist, the best product is one that's very easy to start and very hard to get rid of. When Purdue Pharma started to get sued for its role in kickstarting the opioid epidemic, there were all these memos that were revealed in court proceedings and in whistleblower dumps that in which their executives kind of rubbed their hands and chortled about how easy it was for their customers to get started on Oxy and how hard it was for them to switch away from it. Now, addiction is not the only way to raise switching costs. Facebook makes it very easy to get started, historically going so far as to deceiving you into giving it access to your electronics contacts lists to enmesh you in a network of others who are already signed up to the service. But once you're on Facebook, it's very easy to use Facebook as a portal to the public web. You can link to your friends' updates on rival networks. You can read the news. You can do all kinds of different things on Facebook, and they nudge you into doing that. But when you want to leave Facebook, there's no easy way to do so. You can't go to a Facebook rival and follow what your friends post to Facebook from there. And you certainly can't use a rival service to reply to your Facebook friends and have them see it on Facebook. Interoperability, the thing that Facebook uses to slurp in all that stuff from the open web, it's the key to self-determination. Leaving Facebook in the 21st century is like my grandmother leaving the USSR in the 40s. You can go, but your friends and loved ones and all the stuff that you hold dear are held hostage behind Zuck's Iron Curtain. So leaving Facebook means leaving behind your communities, your relationships. It's not as hard as kicking opioids, but it's not easy either. And your presence on Facebook is one of the things that's keeping someone else from leaving. We all hold each other hostage on Facebook. Now, here's the thing. Everybody wants to minimize risks. Employers and workers, big tech and its users. You want Google. You rather want to use Google in ways that make your life better. And you don't want Google to be able to arbitrarily change or remove the services that you rely on. Just go ahead. Ask me how bitter I am about Google nuking Reader, its old RSS product. Google wants to ensure that you won't leave the company or its products and services. Now, it could improve its retention by making you so delighted with those products that you never consider leaving. But a surer and cheaper way is to interweave those products and services with your life. Make sure that your kid can't go to a public school without creating a Google Classroom account, embedding Google search in your mobile OS, releasing web and app development frameworks for third parties that quietly harvest the data of their users and send it to Google. The more freedom you have to leave Google, the bigger a risk you present to Google. The more Google can lock you in, the lower your risk of departure from the service, and the higher the risk that Google will cease to keep your business by making good products and instead rely on retaining you because you can't leave or because leaving comes at a very high price. Some of you may remember the Emily Latella sketches that Lily Tomlin used to do, where she played a phone operator and did these ads for AT&T saying, "We don't have to care, we're the phone company." That's what every company would like at the end of the day. Interoperability improves your self-determination by safeguarding your ability to change the current situation in incremental steps. Maybe you like your phone and the apps that you have, but you want an app that's been banned in its default app store. Interoperability comes to the rescue here. It allows you to add a second app store to your phone's list of approved software sources. That way you get to keep your phone, keep your apps, keep all the data on your phone, and you get to install that unauthorized app. Without interoperability, the choice is take it or leave it. If the App Store blocks an app you want, the price of getting that app is throwing away your phone, all its apps, and some or even all of the data that you've painstakingly input into that phone. That unauthorized app had better be pretty goddamn good before anyone is going to be willing to pay that price for it. Writ large, interoperability encompasses things as grand as democracy itself. When someone says they like the city but not its bylaws, we don't tell them the law is the law, and if they don't like it, then sell their house. Instead, we set up processes for amending and repealing the laws that chafe the people they govern. And if you do fail in your bid to change the laws in the community that you live in, you get to go to another city, but you don't have to surrender all your possessions or forswear all contact with the people who used to be your neighbors. Interoperability lets you replace the laws and keep the house, or replace the house and find new laws. This whole line of thought started with a reflection of the history of the free software movement, that largely forgotten time in which the default condition of software was freedom. In the absence of copyright, patent, anti-circumvention, terms of service, non-competes, confidentiality, and all the other commonplaces of today's software marketplace, anyone who could figure out how to reverse engineer a program could improve it, replace some or all of it, or read or write its files, compete with it, or sideline it. Today, this is no longer the case. In fact, today's software marketplace is so unlike this previous cake and icing world where the default was software freedom, cake, and the free software movement began its audacious demand for freely reusable source code as a way of making that software freedom as frictionless as possible, icing, that it's virtually impossible today to imagine that moment. This thicket of anti-interoperability rules that have sprung up around interoperability, it has a catch-all name: intellectual property. Now, free software advocates and free culture advocates, they hate the term intellectual property. There's an argument against IP that rails against both its imprecision and its dishonesty. So let's talk about the imprecision here. Prior to the rise of the term intellectual property as an umbrella term, the different legal regimes that it refers to would be referred to by their own individual names. If you wanted to talk about patents, you said patents, not IP. And if you were talking about copyrights, you said copyrights. Bunching together copyrights and trademarks and patents and other rules wasn't particularly useful, since they're all very different legal systems. On the rare instances in which you absolutely had to refer all of these together, the usual terms we used for them was creators' monopolies or authors' monopolies. Now, the anti-IP argument leans into the differences between the underlying rationales for these. So think about copyright. In the US, copyright's purpose is set out in the Constitution. It exists to promote the useful arts and sciences. That is, it exists to provide an incentive for people to create new works of art. Copyright in the constitutional tradition of the US should offer just enough incentive to creators to create, but no more. And copyright does not protect ideas, but only the expressions of those ideas. Patents, on the other hand, are totally different. Patents are an incentive for inventors that asks them to reveal how their machines work. To receive a patent, you have to provide the patent office with a functional description of your invention, and then the patent office publishes it where anyone can read it. Even though other people aren't allowed to use that as a blueprint to copy your invention, they can study it and use it to figure out how other ways to do the same thing that you're doing in ways that don't violate your patent, or just to make things that attach to your patented invention. Trademarks are totally different altogether. Trademarks are basically consumer protection laws. Trademark is a rule that empowers a manufacturer to punish rivals for misleadingly marketing competing products or services in ways that cause confusion among their customers. This is not about giving Coca-Cola the exclusive right to the word Coke. They don't have that right. It's about deputizing Coca-Cola to punish crooks who trick Coke drinkers into drinking stuff that they think is Coke, but which really isn't. Coke's trademarks do not cover non-deceptive, non-confusing uses of its marks, even if those uses harm Coca-Cola, because they don't harm Coke drinkers, and trademark protects consumers, not companies. Seen in this light, intellectual property is completely incoherent. If you say that your work has intellectual property protection, what does that mean? Do you mean that you can sue rivals to protect your customers from deception? Or that the government will block rivals because you've explained how your invention works? Or that you've been given just enough but no more incentive to publish your expressions of ideas with the understanding that the ideas themselves can be freely copied by anyone? But for all that imprecision, when you look at how IP is used by companies, a very precise, if colloquial, meaning emerges. And it's this: IP is any law that I get to invoke that allows me to control the conduct of my competitors, my critics, and my customers. Let me say that again, because that's the core thesis here, my realization. IP is any law that I can invoke that allows me to control the conduct of my competitors, my critics, and my customers. That is, in a world of uncertainty, where other people's unpredictability can erode your profits or mire you in scandal, or even tank your business. IP is a means of forcing other people to arrange their affairs to suit your needs, even if it undermines their needs. Now, there are some ways in which this is completely undeniable. Think about digital rights management. Digital rights management, that's those digital locks in our devices that prevent us from using them in ways that the manufacturer dislikes. So your printer, for example, uses DRM to force you to buy the ink that the manufacturer has approved. Your phone uses DRM to force you to buy apps that the vendor has approved. Ventilators from Medtronic and tractors from John Deere use DRM to force you to get them repaired by the manufacturer and to scrap them when the manufacturer decides that it's time for you to buy a new one. Copyright laws, that is, IP laws, ban tampering with DRM, making it a serious, jailable felony to provide others with tools to bypass DRM. Section 1201 of the US Digital Millennium Copyright Act of 1998, along with foreign laws like Canada's Bill C-32, Article 6 of the European Copyright Directive, and other laws all around the world, establish indiscriminate bans on breaking DRM. Now, these are copyright laws, but it's really telling. The ban on DRM, on breaking DRM, is not limited to copyright infringement. Bypassing DRM to get your printer to accept third-party ink is not a copyright violation. You don't reproduce the code in your printer. You don't duplicate the traces etched into its microchips when you do this. But even though you're not breaking copyright when you jailbreak your phone, you still break copyright law. Let me say that again. Jailbreaking your phone doesn't break copyright, but it breaks copyright law. It's kind of a mind bender. Copyright law under the DMCA and the sections that refer to DRM ban legal conduct if you have to break DRM to engage in it. This isn't copyright protection, it's business model protection. And though you will be charged with a felony copyright violation, what you're really being charged with is felony contempt of business model. And it's not just DRM. Last month, or 2 months ago rather, there was a font release called Goldman Sans. It's a free font that was released by the finance giant and global supervillain Goldman Sachs. Now, Goldman Sans obviously is a copyrighted work, like all fonts. And it comes with a copyright license that you agree to just by clicking the download link. Now, among the license terms for Goldman Sans is a non-disparagement clause. That is, a clause that prohibits you from criticizing Goldman Sachs. Goldman Sachs doesn't need copyright law to prevent people from copying its font. It gives away the font for free. Goldman Sachs needs copyright law so that it can boss people around, so that it can tell them what they may and may not say. Now, the risks to free expression and self-determination have always been latent in copyright, patent, and trademark, and each of these laws have historically been designed to minimize these risks. Each one has its own escape valve that theoretically stops IP owners from using their rights to take away your rights. So in copyright, you're familiar probably with at least the phrase fair use. Fair use allows many kinds of copying, adapting, displaying, and even selling of others' copyrighted expressions, provided that these activities promote the free and robust discourse by transforming or commenting on or analyzing the copyrighted work. Fair use does not depend on a copyright holder's permission. You can make fair uses even and especially when the rights holders don't want you to. Hang on, let me get reseated on my swing here. We do have swings in my bar. Patent has its own escape valve, publication. If you want a patent, you have to disclose how the invention works. And those disclosures are on display from the start, where anyone can study them and use them as inspiration for their own inventions. Patents allow you to punish people who duplicate your invention, but they also require that you tell people exactly what steps they must take to effect that duplication, and also provide a roadmap for replicating your invention's functions without violating your patent. Trademark has two really important escape valves. The first is that trademark holders can only enforce their rights against rivals who use them in deceptive ways, likely to cause public confusion. And the second is that trademark is subject to something called the nominative defense. It's not a violation of trademark to use that mark in ways that describe, oh, sir, you're right. It was Ernestine. Thank you. It's not a violation of trademark to use the mark in ways that describe the goods or services it's associated with. You can put a sign in your window that says, "We fix iPhones," or "Cheap ink for HP printers," or "Our cola tastes better than Coke." And there is nothing that the trademark holder gets to do about it. Now, these escape valves have been a lot less durable than we might have hoped. It turns out that much of their efficacy depended on there being robust competition in the marketplace, so that when one company tries to narrow fair use in court, other companies that depend on fair use spring up to defend it. Through the past 4 decades of massive consolidation in every industry, a consensus has emerged among the shareholder and managerial classes that these escape valves are defects in otherwise excellent laws, and they have set to work creating legal precedents, new laws, and new legal tactics to jam those escape valves shut. So this is how we went from having software freedom cake to just having the icing. New copyright laws, like the ones that ban breaking DRM, new copyright precedents, like the one that Google is hoping the Supreme Court will hand them over, or Oracle will hand them over to Google, and new tactics for combining copyrights and patents and trademarks and DRM and trade secrets and other IP, so that what trademark permits, copyright will prohibit, and what copyright permits, patent will block, and so on, until all the uncertainty has been moved onto the manufacturer side of the deal, and all the risk has been moved onto yours. Recall that the term of art that preceded IP was the author's monopoly. The tale of how the latter was replaced with the former has many variations, but everyone agrees that it is no fun to be called a monopolist. If you think you don't have enough copyright protection, it is hard to go to Congress or Parliament and demand an expansion of your monopoly. Far more pleasant is to show up and ask for help defending your property. Now, there is a strict sense in which copyrights and patents are monopolies. When you write down a collection of words, this collection of words, a new copyright is born. It gives you the exclusive right to reproduce, adapt, display, or sell the essay. Your rivals can compete with you by writing different essays that they hope to sell to the same magazines and tempt the same readers with, but only you and you alone can sell the essay that you wrote. In that sense, you obviously have a monopoly, a market for a product that only has one seller. That is the purest form of monopoly that there is. But the word monopoly has a very different definition in competition law. A monopolist isn't merely someone who has 100% of the market. A monopolist is someone who has market power, that is, the power to set prices. After HP sells you the printer, it can charge whatever it wants for the ink. You could junk your printer and buy another one, but HP's rivals also charge absurd sums for their ink and also use DRM and IP to punish competitors who introduce cheap ink into the market. The people who bristled at having copyrights called monopolies, they have a point. It is a rare author who has market power. Authors, even big name authors, have very limited power to convince their publishers to pay over the odds. Now, there are a few superstar examples, but they're as rare as meteor strikes. Overwhelmingly, copyright does not confer market power upon creators. However, there are actual no fooling market power monopolies in the entertainment industry. There is one movie chain that controls the vast majority of cinema screens. That's AMC. It's about to go bankrupt, probably going to end up a division of Amazon. There are 3 record labels. There are 4 movie studios. There are 5 publishers, probably to be 4 before the end of the year. There's 1 national brick and mortar bookstore and 1 global online bookseller, which also effectively owns the audiobook market as well as several other entertainment markets. How did these monopolies emerge? Well, in some ways, they came from the same place that all the other monopolies that dominate our modern market have emerged. We have monopolies in energy, eyewear, finance, automotive, aerospace, accounting, civil engineering, beer, spirits, logistics, tobacco. They all come from the same place: lax antitrust enforcement. For 40 years, we've let companies grow by buying their small competitors before those competitors could grow up to really compete with them, to merge with their major competitors and cease competing against them, and to corner vertical markets so they could squeeze their labor, suppliers, and customers. Entertainment monopolies, though, are special because they aggregate authors' monopolies in large quantities. And these monopolies are durable in ways that market power is not. If you control 1/3 of all the music that might be sampled by other musicians, you have a bottleneck that can't be evaded through cunning or creativity. Any attempt to break your monopoly, that's a copyright infringement. And doing it at commercial scale is a criminal copyright infringement. That is to say, banking and aerospace monopolies have to fear being sued for being anti-competitive. But entertainment monopolies get to sue you for being pro-competitive. The result is a monopoly that controls access to distribution channels and audiences, and that can invoke the power of the state to fine or even imprison people who seek to challenge that monopoly. And even where tech is challenging those monopolies, it's doing so in order to create more monopolies. Kindle Unlimited presents a real challenge to traditional genre publishing, and every Kindle Unlimited book is released with DRM that locks it to Amazon's platform. Any attempt to liberate a Kindle Unlimited book so it can be read with a rival's device or on a device designed to stop Amazon from spying on you while you read involves breaking DRM. And trafficking in tools that break DRM are a felony under Section 1201 of the DMCA of 1998. Kindle Unlimited books aren't available in libraries, and giving librarians a tool to remove the DRM and add Kindle Unlimited books to their collection is an imprisonable offense. As Amazon conquers an ever larger proportion of genre readers, it permanently locks those readers to its platform, meaning that any author who wants to access those readers will have to do so on Amazon's terms, turning over the power of their author's monopoly to be used in Amazon's market monopoly. Give authors more copyright, a stronger monopoly, and Amazon will just seize that too, as a condition of reaching the audience that Amazon has imprisoned in a walled garden. Authors' monopolies are not market power monopolies, but if you aggregate enough authors' monopolies rather, in one place, you can turn them into a market power monopoly backed by the power of the courts and the prisons, and accumulate more authors' monopolies every time someone enters that captive marketplace. Now, you may have heard Mark Andreessen, the founder of Netscape, and his famous phrase that software is eating the world. With all due respect to Andreessen, he's wrong. Software has eaten the world, past tense. If there was any doubt, the pandemic has erased it. Lockdown, viewing the world through these screens, there is no longer any distinction between human rights and digital rights. There is no software freedom, there is only freedom. Software is relentlessly expanding into every system and device, from ventilators to tractors, from toothbrushes to sex toys, from refrigerator filters to money itself. And wherever we find software, we find IP. That is, software deployed to control the conduct of competitors, critics, and customers in such a way that overlapping systems of laws can be invoked to punish anyone who bypasses that software. The combination of software and IP in every device is a sea change for the organization of our society. As firms have become increasingly concentrated, as monopolies have emerged in every sector, they have also figured out how to infuse their products with just enough software that it has IP that they can use to control their competitors, critics, and customers. These are market power monopolies backstopped by creators' monopolies, which create IP rights that supercharge market power. And this is just the curtain raiser, because software isn't just a pretense that gets you IP protection for your inert object. It's also a way to automate those objects, to make them into unblinking, ever vigilant enforcers for the manufacturer monopolist's interests. They can detect and interdict any attempt at unauthorized interoperability and call the appropriate authorities to punish the offenders. This is a level of control beyond the wildest dreams of the most sociopathic monopolists. Consider the coal boss, who controlled his workers by moving them into company housing in a company town where they were paid in company script that can only be spent at the company store. This coal boss moved titanic amount of risks off his balance sheet and onto his workers. Not only couldn't they leave for a better job without paying the debts, but they're also paid in non-interoperable proprietary money that only works at the company store, where prices can be adjusted to ensure that those workers' debts are never paid. But even that coal boss, a god to his workers, was not all powerful. A coal worker could buy corn at the company store and trade it for real US greenbacks at the local moonshiner shack, converting non-interoperable script to interoperable dollars at a loss through the intermediate exchange medium of starch. Think of a worker paid in company script today. The digitally enabled smart goods that they buy at their company store can be locked to their accounts in a way that a Kindle book or an iPhone app is locked to your personal device. The unblinking eye of the software enforcement system always watches, ready to discipline you for your lack of consideration for its shareholders' bottom line. Once we had cake, today we have icing. At this rate, the icing will be gone before long. There are no digital rights. There are only human rights. There is no software freedom. There's only human freedom. Thank you. So we're coming up on time here, and I just wanted to close that out. Well, first, I guess with a kind of blatant commercial message here, I have a new book that's all about this stuff, a fiction book, Attack Surface, that has just come out, and you can buy it from the con in the dealer's room. There's signed book plates that you can get. You can read that essay at locusmag.org. Locus is now restructured as a 501c3 nonprofit. They're really hurting, and they could use your help as well. If you've ever thought about taking out a subscription, it is the house organ of our industry. And then I just wanted to say that for all that that essay is somewhat bleak, and I'll stipulate that it's somewhat bleak, things are changing. You know, the US DOJ opened antitrust investigations into Google. The European Union just leaked its tech enforcement regime for monopolies, and it's fucking amazeballs. We have an election coming up in which monopoly is on the ballot. Although I have to say both candidates are kind of foursquare for some monopolies, provided that their donors support them. But a lot of the members of Congress are not. This is a thing that everyone's waking up to. And there have been a string of amazing books published on this subject. And, you know, before the term ecology was coined, there were people who cared about owls and people who cared about the ozone layer, but they weren't a movement. They were just issues. And, you know, the fact that you cared about the ozone layer meant that I might think that you were quite a nice person fighting an important fight, but I didn't think of us as being on the same side. And the coining of the term ecology turned 1,000 issues into one movement with 1,000 ways to get involved. And there are people today who are pissed off because they're pro wrestling fans, and wrestling has dwindled from 30 leagues to 1, and all of the wrestlers have been reclassed as contractors and had their health insurance taken away, and they're dying in their 50s and begging on GoFundMe for money to support themselves so they can die with dignity. And there are people who are pissed off because all beer is now down to about 2 companies. And there's people who's pissed off because all eyewear is down to 1 company, a company called Luxottica in Italy. And people who are pissed off because all their emergency rooms have been cornered by a private equity fund. And they don't know it, but they're all fighting the same fight. Right? That is our hope, right? To go from 1,000 issues to one movement, to understand that when your neighbor is pissed off about beer, that they're pissed off about the same thing you're pissed off about when you're pissed off about Facebook. And for all of us to get behind the same cause with 1,000 ways to get involved. Now we're at the time, and my barbecue is smelling very good. So I'm going to go flip the steaks. And thank you all again very, very much for attending. This is my joke at every one of these, but like nothing I like better after a hard week at work than jumping on a Zoom conference all weekend. But here we are, and you're doing it. And I am intensely grateful to you for it. And I hope you enjoy the rest of the con. I want to thank the con runners. I was a con-going fan who used to sleep in the gopher hole and bring coffee to the guests of honor. And it's a thankless task. And it's an even more thankless task when you don't get to preside over a fun party with all your friends at it. So you folks are doing yeoman service. And thank you very much for that hard work you're doing. So I hope you enjoy the rest of your con.
Thank you, Cory. Have a great evening.
Yeah, you too.